Welcome to the Selling in the Motor Trade podcast, in association with Simco Training. This is the weekly podcast where we share best practice, tips and ideas on how to sell more cars, improve your service department, and generally put more profit into your dealership or dealer group. I'm your host, Simon Bowkett. Now, some of you probably already know me as Skippy. I would start by saying thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Selling in the Motor Trade. Today, it's my pleasure to be joined with Daksh Gupta. Now, I've got to say, I've been trying to interview Daksh for a while now. I know he's been very, very busy, and he spoke to me 2 years ago, said he'd love to come on this, but he had a lot of things on his plate at the time. And I thought, well, we'll just keep plugging away. Now, of course, a lot of things on the plate was everything that happened with Marshalls. So it's been a while, but I'm so happy to have Daksh on the podcast. So Daksh, thank you very much for taking the time for this.
Pleasure. Thank you, Simon.
Now,
sorry it's taken so long to get here, but it's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you here. Now, listen, just for people who don't know you, for people who've been living under a rock, I know you joined Marshalls, I believe it was in 2008. You took the business from a 3 million turnover to, I believe it was just short of 4 billion. At the time there, you bought and sold something like 227 businesses. It works out that's one deal every 57 days, I hear from your LinkedIn page there, which is massive. You've grown the business, but still it was 11th best employer in the UK. You've got you built your own in-house KPI development platform to track it. So you've done so much with Marshalls, and lots of people want to know exactly what you've done with Marshalls and how you've done that. But I want to go back to the beginning, if that's okay. I want to talk about how did you get started in the motor trade? Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I guess like a lot of people, they get into this sector by accident, and that was certainly the case for me. I was went to study at Oxford Brookes University. Not that was that clever, because it used to be a poly, so I got into Oxford Brookes when they changed from polys to unis, but it always looked good at my qualifications anyway. And one of the things with Oxford is the student population is like 3 times the size of the actual people who live there in the town itself. So trying to get a Saturday job or part-time job is very difficult because of the intake of students there. So saw an advert for the opportunity to wash cars on a Saturday, and basically applied for it. £15 per day in, it would be 1989, I guess, 1990, somewhere around then. And so went to wash cars, and just really had the opportunity to get into sales, but again, by pure accident. So the owner of the company said to me on the second weekend, said, "Why are you washing cars?" I explained, "Look, my parents believe I should pay my way through university," which I'm fully supportive of, and I've done the same with my eldest, who's gone through university, and I'll do the same with the other 2 if you're listening to this podcast. You'll university, because I think it's important. My dad always used to say, "Learn the value of a pound," and at that time, dealerships didn't open on a Sunday, and the owner said to me, a guy called James French. So James, if you're listening to this, thank you for that opportunity back 30 something years ago. And he said, "Look, would you come in and sell cars on a Sunday? We don't open, but no, as we know now, it's the second busiest trading day because people come in when they're off, and the rest is history."
Well, a good friend of both of ours, Chris Wiseman, he started washing cars to start with. I started washing cars when I was 17 as well, and I've got to say, I hated it at the time, but what a great grounding I think it was, actually. Yeah. Did you find it good grounding as well for the rest of your career, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the things is always trying to keep it real. I've been really fortunate in my career. I've worked with some amazing people, amazing mentors, and I'm really conscious that not everybody gets to be a chief executive of a business, and not everybody has that opportunity, and it's hard work, and you have to have a little bit of luck sometimes on your side as well. But also, I always, in fact, I said this to one of my colleagues yesterday, whenever we make decisions, we must always remember how it lands in the business. And I always feel that I always promised myself, if I ever made a senior position within any industry, that I would have basically always remember where I came from, and remember I started at the very bottom and worked my way through up, and how would people feel with the decisions that I made. So that's one of my sense checks to any sort of decision that I make is, how's it going to land in the business. So Yeah, I mean, that experience was fantastic for me, starting at the very bottom. And unfortunately, I only had to do it for 2 weekends, and then I had the luxury of going and selling cars, which is a bit.
So you must have done well. Do you remember the first car you sold?
Oh, absolutely. So the first car I sold, there's a real good lesson in this actually, was we had a Super Turbo G849 PUD. And
Wow.
I guess this would have been 1990. So, and that would have been an 89 on a G. So it was only like less than, 6 months old, 12 months old.
Mhm.
For turbos, it was in black, and it was the most expensive car in the forecourt, 29,995, which in today's money is probably like 80 grand or something crazy, and probably more actually thinking about it, and with inflation. But customer came in on a bike, and people said, "Oh, he's not, tire kicker. He's not going to be genuine." And the circumstances, his name was, I probably won't say his name for GDPR reasons, but Mr. Miles, and he came in and he said, "I'd like to test drive that car." And of course, everyone else, he's time waster. He's coming on a bike. Turns out he'd actually had his car stolen, and he had a check with him from his insurance company. So and he drove it and he bought it. And I think that was the first car I sold. It was a real good lesson that you can't prejudge anyone.
No.
Every customer equally, treat every customer with respect, because you don't know what their circumstances are, So that was a really, really fantastic lesson for me on my first car to sell. And I guess, being new to the industry, you don't have any bad habits. So
Yes.
from a personal perspective, sometimes people do prejudge, as we know in the sector. And I think that really, well, treat people with respect, do what you say you're going to do. And surprise, if you treat people like that, they buy from you. People buy from people at the end of the day.
They certainly do, always have, always will. And I suppose that seamlessly brings me into the next question. And this is always just a shameless plug for our first 90-day sales training program. We always say the skills people learn in the first 90 days, good and bad, last them for the rest of their career. So that's why we say, who trains the brand new people? So often it's the 5-car shred, as Dave Anderson would say. Can I ask you, Dash, is there anything that you learned in that first 3 months? And I imagine not prejudging people, but is there anything else that you learned in the first 3 months that's as relevant today as it was back in 1989?
Oh, 100%. And some of the stuff, the stuff I learned in the automotive sector will stay with me for the rest of my life, and I've used throughout my whole career, because it's using things, simple techniques of how you answer the phone, how you use open and close questions to establish customer needs, how you will get a customer to commit to an appointment. So by saying, when's a convenient time for you to pop down, this morning or this afternoon, Saturday or Sunday, morning or afternoon, 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, would you like a coffee? just little simple techniques like that aren't in a threatening manner, but actually can help you sell more. And I think, I was very lucky. I was 18, 19, and it was
fun.
Yeah, so when you don't know anything else, you just listen and you just follow the process. You do what you're told to do. So I had no baggage with me, and not being from the industry, not knowing anything about it, I was very teachable, and I think as people are at that age, and I just did what I was told to do, and I literally was like a parrot. I was told to say these things, and I said those things, and guess what? If you follow the process, it works, right? So and I've applied that throughout my whole career in the sector.
I'm really curious, how much of this, you're in a different sector now, okay? So in construction, managing directions of Huws, managing director, sorry, chair, sorry. How do the skills that you learn in the motor trade, how much do they transfer into other industries? I've only worked in the motor trade.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, it was a really exciting opportunity. I mean, I'm working with the best alternative investment management company in the world, Blackstone, and they're 1.2 trillion. I had to Google how many noughts that was, a 1.2 trillion dollar company. They are the best in the world at what they do. I mean, they've delivered a north of 20% return every year for the last decade. That tells you how good these guys are. And the opportunity to work with those guys was just too appealing to me. But actually running this business, I think, okay, how do I feel about going outside the industry, and how do I feel about sectors? Because you do sort of question, are those skills transferable? And I think one of the things that in automotive, people sort of criticize, there's not enough good people in automotive, but the people in automotive are good. I mean, they really, I've had the opportunity in working in different businesses, different sectors, and the people in automotive are very, very high quality. And I think, my observations of that, you typically work in the retail side with margins in the UK of between 10 and 12% gross margins. your operating expenses are typically 10%, and you make, the difference between the two. And, typically UK average returns being around the 1% for the long-term average. I appreciate
Yes.
it's been a lot higher, but in reality, if you're working to that wafer thin margin, and in a business that's so highly operationally good, you have got to be all over the detail. And you really taught good skills around understanding accounts, understanding numbers, stock management, working capital management, and those skills are absolutely transferable. They're transferable to the sector I'm in. So what do I know about building materials and construction, or kitchens or bathrooms or paving slabs? I don't. Actually, the skills are identical. It's about leadership, it's about having a strategy, and understanding what the key dynamics are of a business, and it's absolutely transferable. And 7 months in here now, we're making a very big difference to the organization. I'm very lucky. I've got a fantastic team of people to me, and they're really teachable, and they're teaching me about a new sector. And hands up, I'm openly put my hands up and say I've got a lot to learn there, but equally they're open to learning new ideas, and it's making a real difference. So I think people should in the automotive industry really understand that they have got good skills there.
I'm glad you said that, because someone else I interviewed on the podcast said, when you think about a head of business, a general manager, there's 5 businesses. It's such a complicated business compared to so many other businesses out there. And you're right about the margin. You have to be very good. And I agree with you. I've only worked in the motor trade, but from the outside, there's still that stigma that, well, the motor trade, it's not that hard, is it? But I'm so glad.
Actually, Simon, I'd build on some of your comments. It's not just the 5 income streams, but you also have to be a people manager. You have to have negotiating skills. You're working with, OEMs who have got, for the right reason, high standards to their brands because they want to protect that brand. You've got to have customer skills. So, you are an all-round, and, these roles, I know more people are going towards head of business as a title now, but, it used to be, general manager in my day, and you are a general manager. You have to have multiple skills, and those skills are transferable. And I think you will see, people with that experience who've done well switch industries, I'm sure.
Yeah. So can you tell me about your first step into management then? How did that happen? So you were selling cars, and I believe your first step into management was the Reading dealership. Is that right?
Yeah. I had the opportunity to go and work with Keith Brock, who was actually my Nissan zone manager. And, I was a baby. I was like 23 years old, right? So Keith gave me my first, real big opportunity to go and run that business. And we had, this was a business that was doing like 100 used cars a month, right? Big market. Nissan back in the day was a fantastic franchise. It's still a great franchise today, but back then, you've got the Nissan GB guys coming, great product, and they were gaining market share. So it was a really exciting place to work. And, nobody kind of teaches you to be a manager, but the approach that I took was, okay, if I can teach my team to be great at what they do in terms of looking after customers, following the basics, following process, following the scripts in terms of training and trying to help them, coach them. Even today, even the business here, I say, look, my job is to help you. I work for you. That's my job. I say that all the time. For me, I just took the view that if I can help my people be better, then ultimately, you get the reflective credit in respect to them being successful, because it all comes back to you at the end of the day. So that's what I saw as a big part of my job in terms of being a coach and a mentor to my people and my teams. And that's how I've always.
I love that philosophy. I'm working for you. I'm here to make your job easier. And so many times I get brand new managers don't see it that way. They flip it. It's such good advice there. Do you have any other advice for someone taking that first step into management? How do they get that first step?
I think there's always that anxiety people have. Even for me, I'm running a 1.7 billion pound business here, and just to put it into perspective, this has 330 sites, and our previous year EBITDA was 156 million. So this is a big business, right? So there's always that anxiety. Are you good enough? Have I made the right decision? Have I got the confidence to do it? But nobody teaches you to go to CEO school. Now, okay, I've been a CEO for many, many years. I was a CEO at 37 years old, and I was a director at Inchcape at 30. So, and I'm 53 now. So I've been doing it for 23 years. But even switching, you still have that imposter syndrome. And I think everyone has that And I think anybody who sort of says, and I'm a reasonably confident individual, but you still do question, are you good enough? So I don't think people should be anxious about it. I think, a lot of people don't go out there to win and have that winning mindset, or have the ambition, or don't let people know. So, how can your bosses know that you want to progress if you don't tell them? They haven't got crystal balls. But also, you got to stand out.
Yeah.
Why should you get that opportunity? Some people feel, oh, I've been here the longest, I should get the job. What is it that you do that makes you deserve it? What's your attitude like? I like people who are going to, who are going to go and show me a good attitude. And the stars always come to the top. You can see them, but what is it that you do personally that makes a difference in terms of saying, yeah, I'm a star that deserves that opportunity?
Yeah, I'm glad you said about that imposter syndrome, because I have so many people that come up the after sales side of it and nervous about the sales side of the business, or vice versa. And it's almost like giving them that confidence that, listen, just go for it. You're fine. You know everything you need to know. Don't go in pretending you know everything about it, and just ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions sometimes. Because I always feel that. So this might sound like a naive question, but I've got you here. How does that work? Can you talk about?
I completely agree, Simon. I mean, I've been CEO for a long time. I'm 53. I'm still very young. I feel 33. And here, I know nothing about the sector, but I ask lots and lots and lots and lots of questions. Don't be scared to ask questions, because actually the worst thing you could do is not ask the question if you're not sure. That's how you learn.
Yeah.
And none of your leaders or your bosses, are going to ever criticize that. And actually, they'll see that as a good thing, because you're curious, you want to learn. So I think that's really good advice you've given, Simon. And I'm doing the same thing here because I've got a lot to learn.
It was in that Reading dealership. I was at High Wycombe. You were at Reading, sitting down with Keith Brock and Mike Thompson. When I was just a salesperson going through the accounts, and it's accounts review. I had clearly no idea, just a brand new salesperson, Dash. But I was like, how does that work? What's that? Okay, volume bonus. What is volume bonus? And Mike Thompson, Keith Brock took the time to explain it. They didn't have to do that to me as a salesperson, but I suppose they've seen there that there was that interest there, how it works. I think everyone.
Yeah, and Keith also, he really supported me, because again, I if I'm honest, at the time I probably got the opportunity to run a bigger business at a very young age in Reading, because I was a good salesperson, and we were not smashing it out of the park in terms of sales. And I think Keith probably recognized that, that's what I brought to the table. But actually, I think what Keith helped me achieve was an understanding of that big picture of how the numbers were, because today, and everything I do today, is all about the numbers, because the numbers are a direct output of what we do in the business. So whatever you do operationally in the business, and the inputs that you do operationally, result in the outputs and the numbers. So if you can understand how the numbers work and the levers work, then you can know what you need to do to improve the business operationally. So, and not enough people, I think, really understand that. So one of the best bits of advice I'd give people is, make time to understand the numbers. And if you don't understand them, go and talk to your accountants. Your accountants would love you to go and ask those questions, because they're there to help.
Yeah. So true. I was just going to ask you, so you walk into a new business you've acquired, a new department, someone takes, they're in a group and they go to another dealership within their group there. What are some of the first things you look for? I may have got that wrong. It sounds like you're looking at the numbers straight away. I would thought you were going to say it's the people first, processes, but what do you look for when you go into the business or department?
Yeah, so I actually look at quite a few things. It's not just any one individual KPI. I mean, I do start with the numbers, to be honest with you, because numbers don't lie. The numbers tell you what's going on in the business. And then you can get a sense of what's going on behind that, because, as I said, the numbers are an output of what we do operationally. So, when you look at numbers, if a business isn't performing, if it's down to gross margin, what's happening in terms of discounting, what's happening in terms of stock, there's always something that's driving the numbers, and there's always a reason why something's happened. So I start with the numbers to understand where the issues are. So is it a sales rate issue? Is it a new to used car ratio issue? Is it a margin issue? There's always something that is a driver behind why they look. So that gives me an indication of what questions to then ask. Okay. You'll make a judgment, and you'll just ask questions of, why's your margin? I also love benchmarks. So I love league tables, love benchmarking businesses. So, one of the bosses I worked at Inchcape many years ago, one of the best businessmen in this country, I would say, is Andre Lacroix. I learned a lot from him because he was talking about gold standard benchmarking and how he would use KPIs to look at the bottom quartile, moving them up towards national average. And if you just move the bottom quartile to average, if you look at that in your business, the numbers are transformational. I mean, in a business like this, it's tens of millions of pounds, So understanding that, and then you ask questions as to, well, can you explain why this is? And just listen, and you listen to what the explanation is, and you say, well, this is what good looks like, and this is what others are doing, which is why I always just like looking at composites. So you've got a benchmark, because if the rest of the network's doing it, well, why can't we? What are the things that are preventing us? And there's always a reason. Sometimes it's because we haven't been ambitious enough. If it's something like, say, used car stock turn, what's our stocking policy? How fast are we turning vehicles through the workshop? How fast are we preparing things? What's our order to delivery cycle? There's always something that gives you the answer. And then you listen to the knowledge of what that person's telling you. Do they know the numbers? Do they know the understanding? Or do they like, what numbers are you talking about? And then you make a judgment on the people, So for me, sometimes there are issues, but if you've got the confidence that that person has an understanding, then, you'll get there with that person. It's about helping and supporting that person, coaching them, training them, whatever that you need to do. And on some occasions, you maybe have the wrong people, but that's for the numbers, and then assessing the individuals and seeing how competent they are on the numbers.
I suppose it's a question that could be a podcast in itself, but what KPIs do you start looking at? I mean, that's a huge question, I know there, but are there any key ones that you like to go and look at straight away on a business there that really...
I would say there's not any one single. I like to look at a balanced scorecard, because an old boss of mine, one of the best retailers in the UK, Graham Potts, who was the CEO of Vardy, and became the CEO of Inchcape in the UK. Great retailer, one of the best in the country. He always used to, I've been really lucky. You sort of still one-liners, and one of the liners he said was sin of the single indicator. And what that basically is, you can't just look at one indicator, because you might look at something in this lens, but actually there's a reason why it's over here. So, for example, one of the things I'm sort of actually teaching in this business is, don't just focus purely on margin, because if you purely focus on margin, okay, you could lose volume. Okay. Yeah. Equally, don't just focus on volume, because if you just focus on volume, you could make no margin. So there's a balance in there. So I think I don't just look at one KPI. I look at multiple KPIs. So obviously profitability is really important. You look at volumes is really important. I like to win market share. I mean, in my previous company, we won market share every single year. In fact, can't say too much here, but that's a mantra we've got, internally, that we win market share. We steal dinner from our competitors. That's what we're focused on. And so lots of things I look at in a business.
What I love about this, in this conversation for 20 minutes, you must have mentioned 4, maybe 5 mentors at the moment. It sounds like you've always looked up to people and stolen as many ideas as you possibly can from these. Any other mentors really stand out in your time? And what do you do? Do you, going through your career, did you just see someone say, right, I'm loving what you're doing there, and did you mold yourself on them? Can you talk about your mentors and how they have shaped you?
Do you know what, Simon? I am so privileged and lucky to have worked with so many amazing people, and you always learn something, and even if they're not from the sector. So it's interesting. In automotive, Graham Potts was my boss, one of the best retailers in the country. And, he came into Inchcape and made a huge change, literally. In fact, I was the relatively recently promoted franchise director. I was a baby at 30. I thought I was going to get fired, because I was like last one in. And I learned so much from him, in terms of retailing, particularly around used cars. So that was amazing. And you just listen to what he says and some of his theories and philosophies and his experience. And how can you not learn from someone who built, with Sir Peter, the Vardy organization is one of the best retailers in the country. So you're always going to learn something there. I've worked with Sarah Sillars, who's amazing on the people front, who was the former chief executive of the IMI. She was on our board at Marshall, Marshall Cambridge Holdings. Alan Cook, who, was 15 years as the chief executive of Cobham, then became the chairman of WS Atkins, phenomenal success story. And then also, chairman of HS2, again, just an amazing guy. And, even though he's not in the sector, you listen to what he does, what he says, how he does it. Peter Johnson, who was the chief executive and chairman of Inchcape, learned so much from him. Alan Ferguson, who was, I think, on the ran 4 audit committees for PLCs. I mean that guy's so smart when it comes to numbers, and You know, you just learn. He's very calm and very measured, and you watch him in board meetings, think, yeah, I wish I'd said it the way he'd said it. You know, just really, really smart, and teaches you to do things properly, and teaches you about, you know, presenting numbers in a professional manner and transparent manner, because investors like that. So, you know, so many mentors. I mean, I could spend all day talking about that. I mean, Sir Michael Marshall, who recruited me at Marshall, you know, who talked about values and genuinely cared about people and values, which aligned to my philosophy. You know, so you always learn something. I mean, you can imagine the Marshall boardroom at Cambridge. I had Sir Ralph Robbins. I mean, you know, I'll never forget Sir Ralph Robbins, who was the chief exec of Rolls Royce, and I had dinner with him, and I said, Sir Ralph, what was the toughest decision you had to make? So the toughest decision, I had to let 50,000 people go. And you think, wow, I'm just a little tiny nobody, and I'm working with this guy on my board. And you know, Peter Harvey, ex-Barclays. I mean, look, I could spend here all day talking about the mentors, and there's many more that, you know, we're going to run out of time for me to talk to. But you always learn something. You always learn something, and you can always learn. You know, I'm learning in my new role today, which I love. I'm working with Blackstone, who are amazing. You know, I was in New York with Stephen Schwartzman, you know, one of the wealthiest people on the planet. You know, 42 billion net worth. Couple of dollars behind you, Simon, but you know, and you listen to what these guys say, and you know, they're really smart people. I like hanging around people who are smart, and you can listen. You can always learn, you know, and you should always have that open mindset.
Well, I talked to a few people that we both know about before this, okay, and over the years, what makes Dash stand out? People we know, like Keith Rock, he told me this great story about Dash is all about detail, detail for detail. He's talking about buying and selling businesses, for example. And he can tell the great story about the contract. It's the detail on the contract. Let's go through it. You beat him up on it. I spoke to Casey about what made Dash. He said he just had this inner desire to want to win all the time. He just had that inner desire to win. I suppose Pat Casey has that same inner desire to win, no matter what. But Paul Brayley, I spoke to him, and he tells this great story about you're having a meal with him and a few other people in Harpenden, and they talk about having a half day off or a golf or something like that. And it was like, no, Dash needs to get back and run Marshalls. Okay, and Paul said, you're running Marshalls, surely you have half a day off here or there. And he said, no, it's his hard work ethic. So that's what these people from the outside said. What do you think? What makes you stand out? What are some of the other factors? Do you agree with what these other people said about?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I listen to what you said, I mean, I remember the story with Keith, you know, who was selling the business, and I said, Keith, you're only ever going to do this once. And I've bought and sold 227 businesses, so I've got a tiny bit of experience there. And just try to help him and Steve Patch, you know, because if you're not experienced at doing that, it can cost you a lot of money, you know. So just try to help them. Keith's one of my oldest and dearest friends, so wanted to do the right thing. So yeah, I mean, I think it's attention to detail, as Pat said. I mean, for me, you know, yeah, I am very focused as an individual. I've got a lot of drive. I think that's clear. But I don't find work. I mean, literally, you know, I probably do on an average day 18, 19, sometimes 20 hours a day when it's pretty full on, you know. And but work's not work. If I felt work was work, I wouldn't do it. You know, I mean, I genuinely work because I enjoy it. I want to see the organization do well. I want to see people do well. I want to see people grow. And it's rewarding and it's successful when you see an organization changing. You know, in this organization, we're going through massive cultural change. But you know, when you see the feedback and you see what people are feeling, that you could, you know, it's a privilege to lead, and it's a privilege. It's work's not work. It's fun. Okay, and I appreciate I'm in the position where I, you know, have got that ability to say it's fun. But I genuinely do. I'm in a very, very fortunate position. I've had a, you know, reasonably successful career, and I've done reasonably well, but I don't work because I have to. I do it because I want to, and the day I don't enjoy it is the day I'll stop. But I'm not sure that will ever come because I enjoy it. So, you know, talking to your comment on Paul there, yeah, I go to work, but and I do work really, really, really hard. I always had this lack of confidence about, am I good enough? So I always felt, well, I'm probably not good enough, and part of it is I've got to try and learn as much as I can to sort of make sure that I can, you know, prove that I'm good enough, I guess, really. And the other thing I'd say is surround yourself with amazing people. You know, all the people I've got around me, I try and recruit. Sometimes people don't recruit people better than them. because it's a confidence thing.
Yep.
My view is get the best you can, get great people around, because it makes your life easy, you know. And if you've got people better than you, and they do well for the organization, they also then have the confidence to go and recruit great people. That's how you have a solid business. When you see businesses not successful is where they've got weak leaders at the top, and what they do is they basically recruit weaker people, and then what happens is they recruit weaker people, and the organization is built on sand. So yeah, that's always been my philosophy and ethos. So I think the comments that you've raised are probably quite factual on me, but the drive has always been a determination to win, for the organization, and that's been the thing, I guess, in my DNA from day one, really.
Yeah, I'm interested to get your views now on the motor trade, because you've been out of it now for is it 18 months, 2 years, something like that?
Well, I'm still associated with the industry because obviously I've been working with Ford, and so I've been advising the board of Europe since June, since my last year, and that's been amazing, helping them on agency. The guys in Cologne and in Amsterdam, so it's been really, really, really interesting project. And then obviously I'm also vice president of the IMI as well. So I'm still associated with the industry, and I always will be, because I love the industry. I love the people. It's a brilliant industry to get involved with. I love the brands. I have fantastic relationships with the OEMs. I still talk to, and I consider them as friends. I was talking to, I won't say this, but I speak to quite a few of the senior OEM MDs today. I've got brilliant relationships, and it's been a while since I've been out, but I will always be associated. So I don't really consider I'm fully out, because I've obviously got the other stuff, and you never know what.
Well, listen, you said, I don't know when you said this, but you said there might be 5 or 6 supergroups in the motor trade. Do you remember when you first said that? That must have been going back.
Yeah, that wasn't an interview. I think it was around 2020, because it was around COVID time. And I was talking about consolidation, and the question was put to me, where do I think the industry was going to go? And I said back then that I believe there would be, around 5 supergroups in the UK because of the consolidation that was happening. I think the interview actually said to me, do I think I would be one of those supergroups? And I was, my usual, probably not, just being a bit naughty and just being a bit mischievous. But yeah, absolutely, that was the plan. We were going to be groups, and we built it into a supergroup. And if I'm really honest, the one thing I didn't expect was, there's always a bigger fish. There's always a bigger fish. I was, a reasonable sized fish doing a lot of the buying, but of course someone else comes along and buys you. That's what I didn't expect to happen, to be honest with you, because I would have liked to carry on building the business to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 billion. I've still got time on my side. I've still got the ambition and the drive to want to do it. We've got a brilliant team in that business, but excuse me. So I think I sort of predicted it. I thought we would definitely be one of those supergroups with me leading.
Yeah.
But you can see what's happened. I mean, at the time of the acquisition, I mean, it was a real shock for a lot of the industry, me included, because obviously it was the way it was done and everything. But I think, could anybody have predicted that 5 of the top 10 dealer groups went in 2 years? I mean, it's unbelievable.
But not just that. It's not just the consolidations happening. The number of investors is becoming less and less and less. I think the OEMs want less investors. More, the number of outlets is may not have changed as much, but the number of investors definitely has reduced. That's made a big change. So I suppose with all of that consolidation, and there are economies in scale. Scale has economies. Is there space for the smaller owner-driver dealership? You see them going.
I think it's a really interesting question. I think the OEMs, rightfully so, want good partners, and they want performance. Okay, performance. They want people who are going to represent their brands. It's a privilege to represent some of the brands that I work with. It was a privilege to represent their brand, and you've got to do your job. And I prided myself on having fantastic relationships with the OEMs. You never saw a situation where OEMs were surprised with any of the acquisitions we did, because we consulted with them. It was always in the public statements. We said this deal's approved, even the big deals, and we never hid beyond, we're a PLC, we can't speak to you. We consulted with them in advance. They knew, and we trusted them. I didn't go and ask any of the OEM MDs to sign an NDA because we were a listed company. We trusted them. There was a relationship of trust that had built up over many, many years. So, when we did Ridgeway, if you go and look at the stock exchange announcement, they said all OEMs approve. Well, that means they must have known about it before it was announced, right? Same when we did Motorline, OEMs knew about it before. That was my philosophy to work with these guys. So I think for me, the interesting thing is when you look at the sort of where we've got to today in terms of these super groups, what's the philosophy of those companies going to be? Because there are some big players in there. Do you use power in the wrong way? Do you use your scale, to give you those economies of scale and work against the OEMs and try and leverage that scale? I think the industry's seen that before and has failed. I don't agree that's the right approach to take. That's never been the approach I've taken. It's why I never had a termination in my entire career, ever. So my approach is always work with the OEMs. Now, the interesting thing is when you look at what's happened in the last 2 years with the consolidation, some companies are big. I mean, some manufacturers' representation with these networks are 20%. I mean, and I always took the view that I think OEMs would have this kind of unwritten rule of 10%. Now, I think the interesting thing will be, you're right, they do want fewer partners. It's easier for them to manage. They recognize that having economies of scale is good for the retailer. How comfortable are they with that level? So I there is the opportunity for privately owned groups where the owners are committed to that business long term. But one of the challenges, of course, is funding, and this is where the big groups can come along and write check the hundreds of millions of pounds that we've seen in recent years for some of these big groups. So it's going to be interesting to see how OEMs react to this, because a lot of it will come down to it. Then take Sytner. I mean, I have a huge amount of respect for the Sytner organization. I mean, Darren's and the team there, they're very well respected. They do a fantastic job of representing their partners. And their philosophy has always been, my view is very, very good in the way that they approach OEM relationships. And I think that's something that I always believed. And I think for that reason, those businesses will be fine. But I think those who think they can go against the OEMs, they're train set guys,
Yeah, so true. But you still see that, don't you? People go up against the OEM.
It's going to be one way in that view, because they can terminate. It's very easy now with the way the contracts are written. So working against them, I think, is suicide. But
yeah, I suppose that's something I learned from Keith Rock, because Keith worked for the OEM. I never did that, and he knew that side of the business there, and I definitely learned that keep the OEM on site all the time. And I'm just sitting there thinking, a senior manager listening to this, aspiring to own their own dealership, the dream of owning their own dealership one day, is that dream still achievable, or is it a thing of the past? I mean, years ago, Dash, there used to be these, what do they call them? These dealer development sites where sponsored dealerships. And is that dream still achievable, or do you think that's finished now? What's your views on that?
I think it's achievable. I mean, look, these businesses are highly cash consumptive. If you think about facilities, now, of course, you can go and lease, but of course, that's not always necessarily the right thing to do. But it's not easy. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I wouldn't say it's easy. I mean, look at Stephen Eagle. He started as a sponsored retailer. I mean, he's done a fantastic job to build that business. Look at John O'Hanlon. John started with one single site, and has built that business and done a tremendous job. So it is possible. But I think if you look at what both Stephen and John have done, there's a common thread there. They've worked with the OEMs. So there is, I think for good operators, particularly with what's happened with the consolidation in the last 2 or 3 years, and you look at the scale of representation that some of these big groups have now got, these super groups, if they're not performing, or they don't want to work with the OEMs, or they've got big representation, I think the OEMs will basically, take action to, dilute their representation, not necessarily exit. In some cases, we've seen that, as you know. But I do think what will happen will be, there will be opportunities for good operators to come in and take advantage of that. So I think it's possible. I don't think it's easy, because funding is, I mean, I'm quite happy to say that, this was something that I was looking at doing, but it's not easy getting funding. The sector is going through change. But like I say, I've got a half reasonable track record that, if I was going to try and get backing, then I might have half a chance. But it's not easy. The sector's going, because of that change with EV, move to EV, agent, banks are a little bit, uncertain on the sector because of this change, which I get and I understand. So that's always going to be the challenge.
Yeah. So while I've got you here, you have run a business. You've got 272, if I've got that right, businesses bought and sold at Marshalls. I love this stat. You did a deal every 57 days. Sometimes we have car salespeople do a deal every 57 days. That's amazing. So I want to ask you, how do you get the culture of the business right? And the reason why I ask this question, someone will be listening to this might have 5 or 6 dealerships. They're acquiring a new business. They need to bring that into the business. How difficult is it to get the new business into the culture? And the reason why I ask this is I know a story about what you did on Motorline. The Motorline deal went through, and I know for a fact that you turned up and went to every business. You went to 4 businesses on one day, I believe it was, on the South Coast there.
Probably more, actually, but yeah.
And I heard from someone that we just employed, actually, as a sales trainer, worked for Motorline. And he said, no, Dash come out himself and wanted to. Yeah. Can you talk to me about how difficult is it to get the culture of that into the new business? How difficult is it to get people, but we've always done it this way?
Well, I think culture ultimately starts at the top. It stops at the top of the organization with the leadership, and it starts with the board, and it starts with the leaders in the organization. But ultimately, it's up to all of us in the organization to create the culture. Okay, but it starts at the top. It starts with the with the values of the organization, how you behave, how you treat people. Anyone who knows me knows I like a lot of fun. So anyone who's worked with me will know that we work hard, we play hard, we want to win. We always win because we're competitive, but we also do it with fun. So I think that's really, really important. So the values are really important in an organization, but it's also about how you live those in the organization. So there's lots of ways that you can do this. So we engage with Great Place to Work. I mean, you touched on this earlier. So we always had a really outstanding reputation as an employer. So when we bought a business, actually people were quite happy. As you mentioned, we were the 11th best company to work in the UK, not just in automotive, that's all sectors. And in fact, we were 8 years in a row best UK workplace ranked, and 3 years in a row the best UK retail company to work for in their rankings as well. So, and in fact, here I've just done the Great Place to Work survey in my new organisation. So, and I think for me, there's ways of checking the culture of an organisation, because ultimately, if I take this business, we've got 330 locations, there, all the way up to, in fact, I was there last week, Shetland, believe it or not. So, this is on the Shetland Island with 22,000 people live. How do you ensure the culture's alive there versus down in Exeter or Kent, or where I am today, Nottingham? So it's difficult. So there's ways of sense checking that culture. I think communication is a massive part of it, in terms of telling people where the organization's going, making sure they're engaged. But it starts at the top. And when you're doing, as we said, it was 227 acquisitions, so 227 businesses bought and sold, a deal every 57 days. Getting that culture and that DNA starts from the top. And that's why I used to visit the businesses. Every business I visited, always, day one. Now, obviously, it's difficult when you're buying 57 locations with Motorline, but I did it over a 3-week period. You get everyone together, because when you get taken over, it's unsettling. And you need to reassure people that actually you haven't bought the business because you want to wreck it. You bought the business because actually, to an extent, and I see this. I see people wreck businesses because they don't realize that they think they're buying the franchises and the building. It's not about that. It's the most valuable asset is the people in the business. And when you lose the people, you're dead. It's not about the franchises necessarily. Obviously, that helps, and having the right locations and the property and the stock obviously matters. But without the people, you haven't got a business. And you see so many people get that wrong. So that's why I was committed to making sure we drove the right culture with the team that I've got with me. And we're doing the same thing here. So culture is a big part of it, but it's not easy, and you have to be committed to it, and you have to be clear, and you have to be transparent. So we had our first ever management conference here on the 24th of March. And I said to them, look, judge me based on what I do and hold me to account. I work for you. And in a year's time, I'll be stood up here. And if I don't deliver the things that I've said to you, feel free to give me a telling off. And we did a virtual conference literally 10 days ago, and we said we update them, and people come to work to be engaged. And people have a choice. In the UK, I was listening to the radio this morning. It's practically zero unemployment is what they said on the radio this morning. Okay, so people have a choice of where they want to work. So do you want to work for an organization where you believe in what the vision of the organization is trying to do? You know that the leadership can be trusted, or do you want to work for an organization that doesn't do that? People have a choice, right?
I just need to say this again. Please, managers listen to this who are new in their career. Dash has said it again. I'm working for you. It's not the other way around. It's that philosophy you said again twice on this podcast. I just love that approach there. I just think that's so important just to reiterate that. Listen, you're in a different sector now, and lots of the skills are transferable by the sounds of it. It's all about the culture. It's all the same thing. So I want to go back to the motor trade now, because you mentioned you're working with Ford on the agency sales model. Now, this is a huge question, and it's one that we could spend a whole podcast on as well. The agency model, we've got JLR has said publicly, no, we're not going to do it. Dale White, a great fan of the show, listens all the time, has been on here, has publicly said agency's not for us. I don't believe it. I want to get your views. Is agency a tide that can't stop now? Is it happening anyway? I think a lot of OEMs are looking at it. How is agency going to affect the value of a dealership? If you were working with us on Ford at the moment, I'd love to get your views on agency. Is it happening no matter what?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's pros and cons. I think you have to come up a level. Why is this happening? I mean, look, the industry is evolving because of EV. You've got huge competition coming in with the Chinese brands. Yeah. It's interesting. The EU has just launched 39% tariffs on Chinese brands coming into the EU, and it's about competition. And so part of the challenge when you look at what you probably describe as the current incumbents is the distribution costs. So OEMs have to look at ways of how can they reduce their distribution costs to compete. Now, of course, with tariffs coming in, arguably that's really good for the current incumbents in terms of the European market.
And also, let's look at Tesla. His distribution model, he hasn't got the dealer side of it. I don't know what their costs are compared to the traditional OEM.
Well, it was interesting. I reading the tariffs thing from the EU, actually, they did say they were also keeping an eye on Mr. Musk as well. So,
yeah,
not just a Chinese thing. I think this is about making sure free competition, and also there is a degree of protectionism going on here with the EU, because look at the German car manufacturers, the French, the Italians. They're big volumes and they're big employers, and they've got huge weight with unions and political pressures. So they will be, if you think about what's happening in the US in terms of Trump and protectionism of the US economy, I think you could see further trade wars breaking out with some of this. And it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out. But I think some of that competitive advantage that maybe Tesla or the Chinese had maybe will get equalized out with tariffs, as we've seen. I think what's driving that whole agency piece is, if you look at the traditional model, you've got a car manufacturing, and this, we've all visited, I'm sure, car factories. They're really well, they're slick machines. There's very little cost you can take out of there. The second part is the national sales companies, and OEMs have been evolving and reducing the number of national sales head offices. And then, of course, what's the next big cost? It's the retail distribution. So I think there are some benefits of agency. Getting closer for the OEM to the customer is a good thing, because ultimately, there is a shared interest and a joint interest with the OEM and the retailer. And sometimes, OEMs and retailers do sometimes go up like that. But my philosophy, whether it's right or wrong, but was always, actually, we both want the same thing. What does an OEM want? They want you to sell shitloads of cars. Well, probably not allowed to say that. Sorry.
Of course you can. On this podcast, you can. You definitely can.
Bleed that out. But then they want you to sell loads of cars, right? They want you to sell loads of cars. They want you to sell lots of parts and hours. They want you to make money, and they want you to treat customers properly. That's what they want. Yeah. Guess what? And they do that with balanced scorecards and performance. What do we want? We want exactly the same thing. We want to sell loads of cars, parts and hours, and make a few quid and have happy customers. So our vision is actually aligned. Has always been my philosophy. We both want the same things. Okay, there's sometimes tension on capital investment levels, because the OEM might want a 50 million car showroom, and over here, we want to obviously keep our costs down and look at our capital expenditure. So there's sometimes tension there. There's sometimes tensions on targets, etc. But ultimately, we're trying to achieve the same thing. So for me, if you work with the OEMs in terms of trying to work out what's the best way to be able to retain customers and look at data, for example, and the way that consumers buy, there are some benefits on them. Certainly, I can't say too much about the work I was doing in the Netherlands, because I'm not allowed to, but there are benefits from it. But equally, I also believe that there's benefits of the traditional model as well. So it's kind of, if you can get the best of both worlds, which is one of my mantras on this topic, then that's a really good thing.
I know we both go to the NADA conference to see what's happening across the pond, and the last conference, it was almost like agency won't happen over here. The NADA is saying it's not going to happen. And while I've got you here, I know I've only got another 4 minutes, but I just want to pick your brains on a personal level. I don't understand why the multiples that you get from American dealership seems to be so much higher than what you get in the UK at the moment. If you look at Virtue, for example, it seems a lot lower multiples. Is that part of because there's a nervousness about agency and the NADA is like, it won't happen here? So that's probably a naive question I'm asking there, but I've got you.
I think there's a couple of things. One, the profitability per location in the US is much higher. Okay. Because just look at the geographic footprint. I've studied this I've spent hours talking about this. I've spent a lot of time understanding it. So the scale dynamics are different. The throughput per location's much higher. The profit per rooftop significantly higher than the UK. The geographic footprint is very different in the UK. It's a much more competitive market. The returns are much lower. Also, the American laws do provide a lot more protection for franchising in the US than they do in the UK. So, if you think about some of the changes that have happened in block exemption in recent years, it's kind of swung. I mean, I remember block exemption 2002 being quite a pivotal change for the value in franchise dealers. And look at what happened from 2002, with the Pendragon consolidation, Brammells, Inchcape driving that, Sytner back in 20 odd years ago. And that was on the back of block exemption, because actually the power went a bit more towards the dealers, which was you could buy any franchise if you held a franchise and it couldn't be blocked. Now, some people kind of use that to their own advantage. Some people said, no, we're still going to work in cooperation with the OEMs. But in the US, with recent block exchanges, it's gone back to the OEM has a lot more power. So I think because of that power, there is a nervousness around, well, how much actual longevity do I have in these relationships? Because many of them are like 2 years, or a handful have got 5-year contracts, but most of them are kind of 2-year contracts, and you can be terminated for pretty much any reason. So you've got less stability, and that's one of the reasons why it's quite difficult to get funding. Because if you're going to a bank and saying, lend me X million to go and start my own dealer group, they're going to say, well, what's the longevity of that income stream going to be? Well, I can be terminated within 2 years for no reason. Well, if you're a bank, when are you going to back that? In the US, it's a lot harder to do. Yeah. So I think that protectionism in the US and that you have in the dealer contracts, and I don't necessarily think that's anything to do with NADA or the NFDA. I think Sue and the team do a fantastic job, the NFDA, but also the legislation and the regulations are very different. I also think as well, if you look at the multiples, they are more than double probably. I mean, my good friend Robert, who runs Virtue, done a brilliant job there. He's the last listed company, and when you look at the valuations there compared to some of the US, it's probably more than double. I guess I haven't looked recently, but it's probably way more than double, I would have thought. But does that fundamentally make it sense? I mean, I'm surprised that Virtue being the last hasn't seen a much higher multiple rate, because it's a brilliant, fantastically run business, so it's fascinating. But I do think the big key drivers are the regulations in each country.
No, I really do appreciate it. Dash, I've really enjoyed this. I wish I could have another hour with you, but it's we've had an hour of your time there. I know you've got another meeting. Listen, last thing I want to ask you, the motor trade. You're in a different sector now, but is this still an industry you would recommend to your kids, other people?
It's a fantastic industry. I mean, I had 31 years of fantastic time that I'm still associated with, as I said earlier. I always will be, because, I love the industry. I love the people that I've worked with. It's been a privilege working with amazing people. I love working with the brands. It's a fantastic industry. I have no hesitation in recommending that to anybody. Absolutely. I had a best time of my life there.
Listen, that just leaves me to say thank you so much for your time. It's definitely been worth the wait, so I really do appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks for asking me on. Good to see you, and good luck, everyone.
Thank you. That just leaves me to say that all details of this episode and other episodes on the selling in the motor trade can be found on our website, simcotraining.co.uk. Go there to get a copy of our book, Words That Sell Cars. Go there to sign up to a free trial of our Sales Fitness online sales training program. Easiest way to get hold of me is Simon Bowkett through LinkedIn.